things happen for a reason. And you can't sometimes see why they happen. You know, Steve Jobs used to talk about you sometimes can't connect the dots till later on in life. And so for me, as I started to connect the dots of my childhood and this trauma, one of the questions I started to ask is, well, if this statement is really true, the fact that everything happens for a reason, not to say in any shape or way or form that, you know, I asked for that abuse to happen, but that abuse did happen. And what was behind that?
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Organization Business Podcast. I'm your host, Linh Podetti. My guest today is Shivani Gupta, a speaker, coach, author, entrepreneur, and an EO Queensland member for over 8 years. Now, over the last 21 years of running her own businesses, Shivani has presented to over 250,000 people across 18 countries, coached over 1,500 leaders globally, and have authored 9 books. Her recent book is called Getting Your People to Step Up. Now, she has scaled many of her own businesses over $1 million and has recently exited a business that she grew from $0 to $5 million. Now, in today's episode, Shivani shares the importance of doing self-work, understanding your inner child, overcoming sexual abuse, and how she's turned her adversity into making this world a better place. Now, let's join me in welcoming Shivani.
This video is sponsored by Outsourcing Angel, a company that connects you with top quality and affordable remote staff to handle your busy work. Whether you're looking for a social media assistant, an executive assistant, or someone to edit a podcast like this, we can help. Reclaim your time and visit outsourcingangel.com today.
Well, welcome to the show, Shivani. So great to have you here.
Such a lovely to be here finally, Lynn.
And look, we're wearing bright colors. We're aligned.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, you've been at EO for over 8 years now, and I see that you're a coach, you're a speaker, you're an entrepreneur. You're doing so much, and you wrote a book recently as well. But, first let's, go back into your journey. Like, how did you get into entrepreneurship in the first place?
Well, it was very much an accidental that happened to some people. Other people set out very clearly in terms of becoming an entrepreneur. So mine was definitely an accidental entrepreneur. I actually grew up in an Indian family where there was so much focus on education, and there are no entrepreneurs in my family. So they've all got amazing qualifications, lots of doctors and engineers, and they basically get into that career and they've stayed in those careers. And so I started the same way. So I started working really hard at school, became an engineer, worked as an engineer for a few years, but I just felt that there was something inherently missing. And it didn't start off as I want to work for myself. It really started off as what impact that I want to have. And I actually want to influence more people than the team of people that I was working within in an engineering role. And so I started to think more about leadership. I did some further studies. And then I just had this extraordinary transformational moment going to Nepal. Nepal has just been one of those amazing places for me. And so it was just after the September 11 attacks, the world was in a chaos. And for me, I had very worried family members and friends saying, look, I don't think you should be traveling. I'd already cancelled my trip to Nepal 4 times. I thought, no, this is the time. I'm going to go. And I got there and everybody else had cancelled their trip. So I was the only one on this trip, traveling for a few weeks. And it was the first time in my life that I thought, wow, I needed this space, no phones, pre-mobile phones. And I just started to think about what I really wanted to do. And it was so clear to me on that trip that the first thing I wanted to do was work for myself. It was also very clear to me that I wanted to have and influence a bigger group of people. I didn't know how, I didn't know what. And so I literally came back from that trip and I quit my big corporate job, much to the dismay of my parents. They were like, do you know what you're doing? I'm like, I have no idea, but I'm just going to follow this very strong intuition, this very strong voice on this particular trip. I made a lot of changes. I made a change in my relationship. And I just started a business. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know what I was going to be selling. But, I printed some business cards and I started off, I guess, doing the work that I'm still doing, even though I run other businesses in the meantime, which was, helping coach people and speak at conferences, etc.
Oh, okay. So what were some of those example businesses? And I know you mentioned a lot on your website about scaling a business from $0 to $5 million, and you've done it, scaled your companies to over $1 million multiple times. So what were some of those examples?
Yeah, so I was in the wellness space for over a decade. So we had bricks and mortar sites as well as products, and over 50 staff in those businesses. I'd also had some co-working spaces. So I had bought the building, renovated them, and we had businesses in there. There were probably in there things that are not mentioned on the website is that there was some monumental failures as well. I'd also with a kids' play centre and thinking, wouldn't it be great to be able to replicate that? And it was an absolute disaster. Just didn't do the due diligence on it. Some very, very expensive lessons to learn. So along that journey of 20 plus years in business, there's been some great successes, but a couple of pretty awful failures as well.
Yeah. So what are you doing right now? Like, clearly, are you full-time writing books or are you full-time speaking? Tell us more about your current services and offerings.
Yeah, well, it feels like I've done this full circle. So over 20 years ago, from this trip in Nepal, I came back and I just kind of fell into speaking, fell into a bit of coaching. I wrote my first book a couple of years later in that business. And then, I started to just think through maybe learning how to scale different businesses. And my kids are now 15 and 14, but, 11 years ago, they were super young, right? They were sort of 4 and, 3 and 4. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a local business that was a bit of bricks and mortar? So then stepped into that wellness space. And that really was great to learn about scaling, but I really feel in hindsight, it took me away from my path. Like I was on this path of writing and speaking and coaching. And then I just completely went that off and looked at for that next decade, how to scale businesses. And, we went from a couple of staff to almost 60. So in that period. And so when I exited the business just a year and a bit ago, I thought to myself, what do I really want to do? And one of the things in EO, which is fantastic, I spoke to a lot of EOs about how did they handle the exit. And one of the, there was the 3 lessons that kept coming back over and over again. And one of the lessons that EOs shared with me in this amazing community we are in is they said, make sure that you take some time out. They regretted either having an earnout at the end of an exit of a business, or they regretted not taking enough time out before they jumped into another business. And so I really listened to my EO colleagues and I took a 6-month sabbatical. It was excruciating for me. I'm great at stopping every day and doing my meditation and journaling and my reading. I'm really good at taking time out, for self-care. I'm not so good at taking 6 months out of my diary, where literally every day was, go to a yoga class at 11 a.m. and go and pick up the kids. I'm like, oh my God, like this is horrific. So for somebody that didn't know how to stop for that period, it was really amazing. And I spent a lot of time reflecting. I spent a lot of time journaling, walking, talking to people, having coffees, did a bit of travel. And I really missed this business. The reason I left this corporate world was to start this business. And so for me, Lynn, I've kind of done this full circle. Started that business 20 plus years ago, left it a bit, did a bunch of other things. And after a 6-month sabbatical, I really felt that the influence I want to have and really learn how to master speaking better and really become a better coach and a more of an influencer around that. And to write another book. So finally, after having not written a book for over a decade, it was like starting again. It was like I'd never written one, and I've written a few. And so it was so wonderful to come back in the last year or so to my roots, or it feels like I've come back to my soul's purpose. And so now I'm kind of, my 3 bits of zone of genius that we talk about in EO is really if I can spend more and more of my time speaking and writing and coaching, then I feel like I'm in that zone of genius and try and outsource a lot of that to the rest of the team.
Wow. And what amazes me is from such a young age, you were already asking yourself, how can I make an impact? Now, where did that come from? Not like, I don't remember feeling that way early on. I think it wasn't until I was a single mum and I realized that I really want to create flexibility for myself and others. It was because of something that's kind of a bit later. But yeah, what made you become so focused on that word impact?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Well, firstly, some of it came from my dad. Dad grew up as the youngest in a family of 9 children, so 11 people in this home. And they didn't have a lot, but every single one of those kids is, amazingly educated by their mum and dad. And so Dad really wanted to move to Australia when I was 11, and if you ask him today, you said, Satish, why did you move to Australia? He'd say for Shivani, because she deserved the same opportunities that her brother and me and her uncles deserve. So I'm very grateful to have such an influential father in a culture where perhaps girls' education is not as highly regarded. Yes, I know the world's changing now, but, I've now turned 50, Lynn, so when, 50 plus years ago, that wasn't the case. And unfortunately still isn't the case. So some of that came from him. Then I remember on my birthday, we didn't have lots. Mum and Dad arrived in Australia like a lot of immigrants with 4 suitcases and a little bit of cash. It was in the middle of the recession, but they never really made us feel like we went without anything. They also made sure that on our birthday we had to give money away. And I'm like, God, we don't have that much. Why are we giving money away? And so Dad would always make us on our birthdays to make sure that we gave some money to charity. And he'd always say, look, we're so much better off than so many other people. And I didn't quite get that when you're sort of 12 or 13 buying for a nice dress or, little bits of makeup as a teenager buying where, we probably didn't have lots of cash to be able to do that. The other thing, I always think that when you start to think about this word impact, inspiration or your purpose, I believe, can either come from inspiration where you go somewhere, you see somebody, you read something inspirational and you go, oh my goodness, I want to do that. And so I think particularly leaving the corporate world and that security of a very highly paid job and starting up my own business definitely was out of inspiration. But I also believe that the word impact and purpose can also come from adversity. I believe that there's lots that can come from adversity. And so for me, I didn't realize this till I was in my 20s, but a lot of my patterns and behaviors started to make sense. And when I got into my 20s, I recognized, a bit of a trigger warning for people listening to this is that I realized that I had experienced sexual abuse as a child for a number of years. So I was fairly young, around 5 or 6 years of age. Lots of memories came flooding back, and I had to have quite a bit of therapy, in terms of working out, why me, how could this happen? It was an extended family. So, how could this happen? And so no wonder I had these patterns and behaviors of feeling unsafe around certain things, but I've never really recognized that or done anything about that. So as I worked through that trauma and I worked through working with some fantastic people that fortunately I had, access to, I really started to go, okay, this is horrific and this has happened. But, one of the things I say all the time, and I still do to this day, to my clients, I say this to my family, I say this to my kids, things happen for a reason. And you can't sometimes see why they happen. Steve Jobs used to talk about you sometimes can't connect the dots till later on in life. And so for me, as I started to connect the dots of my childhood and this trauma, one of the questions I started to ask is, well, if this statement is really true, the fact that everything happens for a reason, not to say in any shape or way or form that, I asked for that abuse to happen, but that abuse did happen. And what was behind that? And as I sat and pondered on that question, and, I worked with some great meditation teachers, I worked and through my travels, and I, started to surround myself with people that were a lot more enlightened than I was. The question started to really ask of me, well, why do you think that happened? And I thought, well, this is not a coincidence. It is not a coincidence that, the abuse was occurring till I moved to Australia. It's not a coincidence my dad decided to move here. And I've spoken to my parents about it since, and, obviously they didn't know that abuse was occurring. And that was a whole healing journey in itself. And so the question I started to ask is, well, why did that happen? And what I came to is that, I was so lucky in so many ways that I was able to get out. If I'd stayed there, maybe it would still be happening today. And for so many girls and women and people around the world, it's a continuation cycle. If it's not in their families as children, it happens when they're teenagers, it happens in their adult lives. And, we also know that 1 in 3 girls and women have experienced some sort of sexual abuse and trauma. That is big. That statistic, rips my heart out. And so I'm not really sure how to do all of the things, but for me, the impact, has to be around how do we continue to educate other girls. So, all these other Shivanis, as I call them in my head and heart, how do we help them that they don't experience that? How do we prevent it from happening in the first place? And if it has happened, how do we educate them? How do we help them heal? And so that they can lead the life that they're meant to be leading.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That is, such a vulnerable story. And I know you've done a lot of healing, and that's why you've got to the point where you can share all that now. You mentioned something about you discovered that you were sexually abused. Was that more like you weren't aware it was even bad and you realized later that it was something called that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, because one of the questions I asked of some of the therapists that I worked with was exactly that question. They said that sometimes when we experience trauma, and obviously each person is different, sometimes one of the things that you do is you have this out-of-body experience. You always start to sort of park it at the back of your mind as if it's never happened. And there's a couple of triggers that happened in certain conversations I was having at the time, where all these memories started to flood back and surface. There's that saying, Lynn, that, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. The book will appear when you're meant to read it. And for me, I really strongly feel now that I was ready to be able to deal with that particular trauma, and that's why it started to surface when it did. I've been educated. I had my own freedom. I had my own money. I had access to great therapists. And so for whatever reason, some of those events that occurred allowed me to start to, all these memories came back, and very clearly, like they weren't hazy. And so as I worked with the therapist, they did explain that to me, that sometimes people can there's just too much talking about it. And a lot of people then don't deal with that trauma, like as if it's almost never happened. And other times people go, okay, these memories are coming back, and what do I do about them?
Yeah. This is such a tough topic, because I remember a friend telling me that she was, abused before, but she doesn't want to deal with it. What recommendation would you give to someone that kind of knows something, but, well, it's their problem, they don't want to talk about it? Is there something we could help, or is that something they just need to decide if they want to deal with it? Or, if you're on the receiving end knowing something, is there anything you can do?
Yeah. And, I've now, because I feel like I've done enough work, and, it's continued work, that work is never done, I don't think. But I've now started to speak a little bit about this on stage, and I talk about my child. Some of the work that was really powerful for me was to connect with my inner child. And she, I call her my third child. So I've got these two teenagers, but, she's this 9-year-old that surfaced through one of the therapists that I was working with. And, she had no one. And so one of the really great things I've learned from some of that amazing therapy work was, when I get triggered now, or somebody says something, or something that happens that I feel unsafe, I know it's not, almost all of the time, it's not the 50-year-old Shivani that's reacting. It's the 9-year-old inner child that's reacting. So having a communication with her, I speak to her almost every day. I make sure that she feels okay in certain situations with certain people. And if she doesn't, then my job, as the person who she's inside, as her mum, is to make sure that she feels safe, just like I would with my other two kids. And so that piece of work has been really useful. So when somebody says that, I go, look, find a great therapist. And, again, everybody's different. The work that really helped me was connecting to my inner child, and hearing her and keeping her safe, and making sure that was there. I also think it's a personal journey that, that everybody needs to go through. Sometimes people are really worried that if they start to unravel it, will they go mad? Will they be able to even deal with life? And for so many people, when you look at, mental health being such a prevalent and such a big issue in our society, it always has been there, but it's become more prevalent since COVID. I wonder how much of that is also linked in when we've got 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 boys and men, around the world that have gone some sort of sexual trauma. And so, I'm not an expert in that field, but yes, I can absolutely see that there'd be some correlations. So I think that, and I say to my kids, when they're feeling sick, or, one of them was vomiting about a month ago, he was really unwell. I always say, look, it's better out than in, right? Whatever's, if there's a bug, let's get it out. Like, it's better to vomit out and, let it in. I feel the same thing, right? If there's stuff that's sitting in there that's going to impact you from leading a magnificent life and the life that you've really designed, then what we want to do is it's better to let it out than in. We just want to make sure that when we let it out, that we're under some safety and we've got some people that can hold us, that can support us, whether they're your family or some professionals that can really make sure that they support us. You don't want to try and do all of that on your own. If I'd tried to do that at certain parts of my life, I think that would have been really, really difficult. And I think the other thing I wanted to share with you, this happened recently. I was speaking at an event and I felt that it was really appropriate to talk about my inner child and my journey. And so I shared that particular story that I'm sharing with you. And when I finished on the stage, and there was about 200 people in the room, Lynn, I had about 50 people lined up. And I had women crying, I had men crying, and there was a lineup of people just saying thank you. And so for me, I couldn't stop crying. I'm crying now just talking about it because I went, oh my goodness, we so need to do this piece of work around that. If there's that many people, they're just like, thank you. I didn't know that was available. I'm going to reach out to somebody. And I've had, more than a dozen messages just from that one presentation of people wanting to acknowledge the fact that this had happened to them. And I just felt that was such a powerful thing, not for me to do it, but me just to hold some space and say, this happened to me, that hopefully can give people some permission to do the same.
Yeah, I totally get you, because when I worked with my life coach and I was just able to figure out that I was driven for success because I was trying to prove to my parents that they're wrong about me. I was so bitter and resentful. And just being able to realize that was what was holding me back, my inner child being scared and being angry, and then writing a letter I never even had to give to my parents. I just cried and I just felt free. And from that moment onward, it was just liberating. And so I too have been telling people how important it is to do the inner work. Otherwise, you'll never really be free. There's always something that's driving you, and maybe it's pushing you to work so hard and you don't even know why you're working hard for. And so, yeah, I get you.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful that you did that work. And, I was talking to somebody who's thinking of doing a PhD, and she's already got a master's, and she's very, very highly educated and is a pretty amazing business leader. And there's this void, right? When I asked her, I said, well, why do you want to do that? Your business doesn't need you to do it. Why do you want to do it? And when she started to really reflect on it, she said, I just feel this void. I'm just trying to fill it. Now, we didn't even get to have a conversation whether there was some abuse in her life or not, but when we're striving for that success and we keep wanting to get more or more money or more of this or more of whatever it is that we're striving for, often there's some sort of a void in us that we're trying to fill. For me, it didn't matter how successful I became, I just didn't feel like I was enough. I didn't feel like that I was enough as a person, what I'd achieved was enough. And the reason when I really started to unpack it was so related to me not feeling worthy as a child. When, you suffer abuse for a long period of time or even once off, but, you start to go, I'm not worthy of anything. It doesn't matter what I achieve. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve good to happen to me. And so, yeah, there was a lot of work to be done on that. And unpacking that, because otherwise we lived like that. And I could imagine I could have lived my whole life like that. Whereas, I finally got the courage to now speak about it, in with you in this conversation, speak about it on stage. Not absolutely every single time, but just starting to go, yeah, I'm actually really comfortable speaking about this. And I'm not trying to do therapy on stage, but I need to give permission to people by just speaking about it. If there's 50 plus people lined up, I want to keep talking about it.
I love that. And is this why you have the appreciation for people? Like, you wrote a book about great people in work, and is this that, is it coming from that love for people that's making you write on topics like this? Tell me more about your book.
Well, I think, both as a business leader and as an entrepreneur, as I try to scale different businesses, the biggest challenge has been key talent. And I know that is such a big issue, and certainly the surveys and research is all revealing that is one of the top issues for business leaders and entrepreneurs, is how to get the right people. So how do we attract the right people, but also then how do we retain our key talent? And so I wanted to, I'd been studying this for a while. And so I've studied some great, global thought leaders around that and a number of books around that. I wanted to interview some people both in small and medium-sized businesses and also look at what larger businesses were doing as well. So the book really is a bit of a combination of all of that in terms of my own experience, what tended to work and what didn't tend to work. I also shared quite a few things that I didn't do very well and some of the failures that I'd had in terms of hiring the right people. But what I wanted to do was make the book really practical for business leaders and entrepreneurs, because sometimes our noisy people, sometimes the people that are constantly complaining, our low performers, end up sucking up all our time and energy. And so I wanted the book to be really a shift for business leaders and entrepreneurs, that really we start to focus on our key talent and the people that actually keep our businesses going and perform, that are the high performers, and how do we actually attract them and how do we actually sustain and retain them. So the book's really about 7 strategies that are really practical. There's some models in there that I've developed that are my own, and some models that I share that are around so that a business leader and entrepreneur could read it and hopefully put it into practice straight away, because they're the sort of books I like reading. And there's quite a bit of research in there as well that hopefully simplifies how to, getting your people to step up is a really big thing, and getting more out of and more productivity out of them.
Great. Yeah, I'll definitely put the details in the description so people can check out your new book. Just on to your journey in EO, like how did you get into EO? What has it been like?
Oh, I could talk about this particular topic, I think, for about 5 hours, Lynn. We might need another podcast for that. I hadn't heard of EO till 8 years ago, and I was actually in EO Sydney to start off with. And I had my bank manager who said, "Hey, have you thought about, as you're starting to learn how to scale businesses, have you heard about EO?" And I said, "No, I hadn't." So he actually introduced me to it. He was one of the the bank was one of the strategic alliance partners with EO at the time. And whatever number of interviews you go through to make sure that you're the right fit. And then I remember walking into my first event, and for me, it was like, wow, because I don't have a family of entrepreneurs and very few of my friends outside of EO are entrepreneurs. I kind of always felt like the odd one out. I always say I'm the brown sheep of the family. And so, to walk into a place where there were people that were crazier than me, that was, running 8 or 10 businesses. I think I was running 2 at the time, and who was so gracious and open-hearted and generous with their time. Anybody I've ever asked for has said yes to a coffee. I've got a number of EOs in this book that I've interviewed as well, who I think are doing some amazing things with their people. So that the community is so generous. And, people always say what you put in, you get out. I find in EO, what I put in, I get, 3 to 10x of what I put in. And so the return is pretty amazing. And I'm finding more and more friendships and people I hang out with that are in the EO community. And then 5 and a bit years ago, we moved to Brisbane. So I joined EO Queensland. And so, I've been a member for 8 years, and I've kind of been nudged into a bit of path of leadership. So I was on the chapter board, and then joined the regional, the APAC board, and currently serving as the member products director on that this year.
Yeah, I love it. I see you around, and you're very active in the community, and I too am new, but I'm loving it. So I can see myself still 8 years down the track. Just as we wrap up, I usually like to ask look, ultimately you've gone through so much in business, in life, what do you want the world to remember you for? If this was your last day on earth, or what do you want people to say in your eulogy?
I would want my kids to say pretty amazing things about how they will really struggle without me. But from an impact and world perspective, the legacy I'd love to leave behind is to eliminate sexual abuse of children in family dynamics, because that's where a lot of it happens. It does happen elsewhere. And I would love to educate the world about how there's a different way to create that, and help people heal from that so that people can live magnificent lives. That would be, I'm not sure how to do that, Lynn, and how to have that impact at that level, but that is my deep heartfelt desire.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Shivani. That was so inspiring. And I'll make sure to put all your details in the description so people can connect with you across all the social media networks. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.